They thought she was just another wide-eyed civilian who had wandered into the wrong hangar. They were wrong. The concrete floor of Crosswind Air Combat Academy still glistened with dew when Maddie Hayes stepped across the painted yellow safety line. She wore the same olive-green flight suit as everyone else, but on her slight frame it looked borrowed. The sleeves rolled twice, so the cuffs wouldn't swallow her hands. A scuffed duffel hung from one shoulder, a paperback flight manual peeked from the side pocket. Nothing about her shouted future combat ace, except, perhaps, the steady calm in her grey eyes. To the 20 men already lined up, she was simply the out-of-place newcomer. Colonel Grant Morrison arrived at, 600 sharp boots, striking the deck like small detonations. The trainees snapped to attention, helmet bags tucked tight. Morrison's granite jaw and salt and pepper crew cut belonged on recruitment posters, but his smile never reached his eyes. When those eyes landed on Maddie, they narrowed, as if he'd found an oil stain he couldn't scrub out. "Who signed the guest pass for Little Miss Library?" he barked, letting the sound ricochet off aluminum walls. A few trainees smirked. Most stared straight ahead. Maddie did the same, refusing to flinch. The colonel stalked closer until his shadow swallowed her. He plucked the fresh top talon patch from her chest, inspected the embroidered talon clutching a lightning bolt, then peeled it off in a slow, surgical motion. "You don't belong here," he said, tossing the patch to the floor like lint. "This is an advanced F-22 pipeline, not a career day field trip." A hush spread through the formation. Even the hydraulic hiss of a tow tractor outside seemed to pause. Morrison's voice dropped, colder than the dawn air. "Women like you are a distraction and a liability. The cockpit is no place for sentimental charity hires." The humiliation wasn't new. It was simply public. Maddie thought of the note tucked in her father's old flight, log the one that lived in the bottom of her duffel. "Reach higher than the sky, kiddo." Colonel Jacob Hayes had died 12 years earlier over Kandahar saving 2 wingmen. She would not let Morrison see her blink. He gestured, and 2 security airmen stepped forward. "Escort the civilian out. Make sure she finds the gate." The guards weren't unkind, but the theater was the point. As they guided her past the silent ranks, boots crunching on loose grit, she heard the soft clink of patches when the men inhaled with relief today it wasn't them. Halfway to the exit, she felt something under her heel. Fabric. She bent, picked up the torn talon emblem, and slid it into her breast pocket. The colonel's parting shot followed. "Enjoy the view from the ground, Miss Hayes. Maybe you can give museum tours." Outside, the New Mexico sun cleared the horizon, igniting the desert in molten gold. Maddie inhaled the smell of jet fuel and hot sandan aroma she'd loved since childhood airshows with her dad. A black SUV idled nearby, ready to take her to the main gate. She waved it off. Pride, even wounded, could still walk. With each step toward the perimeter fence, tears threatened. She dug her nails into her palms until the sting steadied her breathing. Beyond the fence lay Highway 70 and a Greyhound station 2 miles east. She had no plan beyond leaving. But surrender wasn't an option. Not when the sky overhead, endless and blue, still felt like home. She paused and turned back. Through the open hangar doors, she could see the silver outline of an F-22 Raptor, wings gleaming like a predator at rest. That jet didn't care who sat in the seat, only that the hands on the controls respected its power. Her fists tightened. "One day," she promised silently, "you and I will dance." A pickup rattled past, raising dust that shimmered in the sun. She watched it fade, then started the long walk into town. Each footfall matched a memory. Her father's laugh inside a maintenance bay, the first time afterburners rumbled through her ribs, the night she topped every metric in academy simulators while instructors checked twice to confirm the data. None of that mattered to Colonel Morrison. It would have to matter to her enough for both of them. She reached the bus stop just as a solitary coach groaned to a halt. The driver eyed her flight suit. "Rough morning, Lieutenant?" "Just a detour," she answered, climbing aboard. The bus hissed away from the base, the runways shrinking in the rear window. Maddie kept her gaze fixed, until even the control tower became a mirage. Only then did she fish the crumpled talon patch from her pocket and smooth it across her knee. The threads were frayed where Morrison's fingernail had torn the edge. She traced the lightning bolt, letting its shape remind her that electricity always finds a path through resistance. Somewhere ahead, the highway bent toward Phoenix, where an old college roommate had once offered a couch and a fresh start. She didn't know what waited after that, a job, a chance, Anything, but she knew the sky wasn't done with her. The people who thought they had grounded Madison Hayes had merely given her a new launch point. The bus rumbled over a bridge, and a flight of F-16s screamed overhead, contrails slicing the blue. Passengers glanced up, but Maddie closed her eyes and felt the roar settle into her bones the way a drummer feels rhythm. No matter how far she traveled today, the sound followed it was the sound of altitude, of possibility, of unfinished business. When she opened her eyes, sunlight slanted through the window, catching on the tiny brass prongs at the back of the talon patch. She pinned it to her collar, a silent vow. Let them laugh, she thought. The next time they see this emblem, it won't be on the ground. It will be banking above their heads, too swift for their doubts to keep up. It had been 6 months since Madison Hayes was walked off the flight line like a trespasser in her own dream. In Phoenix, she kept to herself. She found a job as a civilian consultant at the Anderson Aerospace Museum, giving guided tours on Cold War jet evolution and the transition from F-15s to 5th-gen fighters. To most visitors, she was simply Miss Hayes, the quiet woman with a soft voice and encyclopedic knowledge of aircraft systems. School groups liked her because she didn't lecture. Veterans respected her because she didn't pretend. But no one knew about the flight simulator she kept in her garage, a full cockpit mock-up she had built by hand, wired into a network of military-grade software she'd once helped refine during her time at the academy. Every night, while the rest of the neighborhood watched television, Maddie practiced maneuvers that most test pilots only attempted in theory. She didn't speak about what happened at Crosswind, not to co-workers, not even to her old academy friends, who only knew she had left the track. If she let herself replay Morrison's words, "Women like you are a liability," she felt her throat tighten, so she didn't replay them. She just flew. And then came the air show. Every spring, the Desert Skies exhibition brought thousands to the edge of Phoenix, static aircraft displays, formation flyovers, veterans, reunions, and the main event demonstration flights from active duty squadrons, including the infamous F-22 tactical demo team from Crosswind Air Combat Academy. Maddie had to be there. The museum had a booth, and she was scheduled to present a lecture titled From Dogfights to Data Links, The Evolution of Air Superiority. She told herself it was just another work event. But her hands shook slightly the moment she heard the announcer's voice echo across the tarmac. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the elite F-22 Raptor demonstration team, led by Colonel Grant Morrison. The name hit her like a slap. She froze. Across the field, Morrison emerged from a blacked-out SUV like a celebrity general, surrounded by uniformed pilots and eager onlookers. His flight suit was pristine, sunglasses reflecting the blinding sky. Maddie ducked behind the museum's banner, pulse thudding. She hadn't seen him since the day he'd stripped her patch. Now he was front and center, grinning for the cameras like he hadn't stomped on a career with one sentence. As she turned to leave, 2 young officers stepped into her path. "Wait, aren't you Hayes?" one of them said, squinting. "Oh man," the other chuckled. "You're that chick from Crosswind, right? The one who got yanked before evaluation week?" A few nearby guests turned to look. Maddie's spine went rigid. She offered a tight nod, but kept walking. Behind her, the first officer laughed louder. Guess she finally found her place explaining planes she'll never fly. She ignored them, barely. She needed out. Her mouth tasted like metal. But as she reached the back of the crowd, she heard Morrison's voice again, this time through the stadium-grade loudspeakers. The F-22 is more than just hardware. It's a machine that demands instinct, precision, and, above all, the right kind of pilot, he said. Some people, well, they don't make the cut, not because of politics, but because this jet doesn't care about what you want, it only listens to who you are. There was no mistaking the subtext. His gaze swept the crowd, then looked directly onto her. It was only a second. But the smirk? The smirk said everything. Back at the booth, Maddie clenched the edge of the display table until her knuckles turned white. She tried to focus on her talking points, the aircraft models, the child asking about thrust vectoring. But her vision blurred. And then, fate stepped in. A tall woman in uniform approached quietly. No rank insignia, no visible unit. Madison Hayes? Maddie turned, blinking. "Yes?" "I'm Colonel Dana Marshall, from Edwards AFB." She extended a hand. Her grip was firm but calm. "You and I need to talk, privately." In the makeshift conference tent behind the main pavilion, Marshall laid it out with military clarity. "General Haraway Joint Chief has been reviewing irregularities in performance records, specifically yours. It seems your evaluations at Crosswind were altered. Your simulator logs don't match the official reports filed by Colonel Morrison." Maddie's jaw slackened. "Wait, how do you know?" Marshall slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of tampered entries, annotated by forensic analysts, fabricated error flags, downgraded scores, comments attributed to her that she never made. Maddie's hands shook as she read. The room swayed slightly. For 6 months she'd told herself she'd failed, believed it, carried it. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked. "Because," Marshall said, leaning forward, "we're launching a closed demonstration at Edwards next month. Advanced handling of the Raptor under non-standard conditions. We need a pilot with unique instincts. Someone with something to prove." "You want me to fly?" "We want you to silence every doubt." Maddie looked down at the folder, then at Marshall's calm, steel-grey gaze. "What if it goes wrong?" she asked. "What if Morrison's right, and I really don't belong in the cockpit?" Marshall smiled faintly. "The sky doesn't care about his opinion. It only cares how well you fly." For the first time in months, Madison Hayes felt something shift inside her. Not vengeance, not hope, just direction. She stood. "I'll do it." The desert air over Edwards Air Force Base buzzed with anticipation. This was no ordinary flight demonstration. The military brass, aerospace engineers, and select international observers had been flown in for a closed event titled only Raptor Limits Test Series 7. Colonel Dana Marshall, director of the Advanced Systems Test Directorate, kept her briefing short. "Today's final flight will be conducted by Test Pilot Designate TD-7. The pilot's identity has been withheld to ensure unbiased analysis. What you are about to see is not training. It is proof of capability." From a raised viewing deck, Colonel Grant Morrison leaned against a railing, arms crossed, lips twisted in mild amusement. "She's bringing in mystery pilots now," he muttered to his aide. "Probably another drone jock from the Sim division." He didn't know. Not yet. Below, the F-22 Raptor, assigned to TD-7, glistened under the California sunsleek, customized and armed with more than missiles. This aircraft carried redemption. In the ready room, Madison Hayes fastened her helmet, hands steady despite the storm inside her. The past 2 weeks had been brutal. Medical reclearance, psych evals, long simulator hours, and performance reviews by skeptical eyes. But she passed every test B-wide margins. Marshall entered with a tablet. "You should know. Morrison's here," he insisted. Maddie exhaled through her nose. "Let him watch." Marshall nodded with something like pride. "Telemetry is yours. Show them what the data can't." The hangar doors opened. Madison stepped out, helmet on, visor down, call sign silent. As she approached the Raptor, the crew chief gave a short salute. She climbed into the cockpit like she belonged there because she did. The canopy sealed shut. Systems roared to life. In seconds, the aircraft taxied to the edge of the runway, poised like a predator about to strike. Over the intercom, Marshall's voice crackled. "Tower clears TD-7 for takeoff. No altitude or maneuver restrictions. Make her sing." Madison responded only by pushing the throttle forward. The Raptor launched down the runway and tore into the sky like it had been uncaged. She cleared 30,000 feet in under a minute, rolled into a vertical climb, then pivoted into an impossible corkscrew descental before the crowd could process what they were seeing. From the deck, Morrison leaned forward. "That's not a standard demo," he muttered. The aircraft didn't follow script. It danced. Maddie pushed the jet into a controlled flat spin something, deemed unrecoverable at this altitude, and then recovered it with inches to spare. She rolled the aircraft inverted and skimmed the runway at low altitude, pulling G-forces that would make a seasoned pilot grey out. In the telemetry room, 2 Lockheed engineers scrambled to recalculate flight control margins. "She's not overriding the safety systems," one said, eyes wide. "She's cooperating with them, navigating the control laws like a pianist reads sheet music." Madison pulled the nose up sharply and executed the Cobra maneuver at an angle and recovery vector never before recorded. Then she transitioned into a hover, danced the jet side to side, and climbed vertically, again disappearing into the sky. The crowd was stunned. until the sonic boom hit. And then she came back. The Raptor roared straight overhead, inverted, flying so low that everyone felt the engines rumble in their chests. Colonel Morrison stumbled backward, eyes wide. No, it can't be. The aircraft touched down with surgical precision. Silence. Absolute silence. And then Madison stepped out. Helmet off, sundae catching in her short, wind-blown hair, flight suit clinging to her like armor. Someone in the viewing deck whispered, That's Madison Hayes." Across the tarmac, Morrison's face drained of color. General Haraway, standing beside him, broke the silence. "You remember her, don't you, Grant?" Morrison didn't answer. His mouth opened once, then closed. Colonel Marshall stepped forward, her voice amplified for all to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you just witnessed wasn't a stunt, it was a redefinition. Test pilot TD7 is Captain Madison Hayes, reinstated and fully cleared. Her data will be used to rewrite the operational performance parameters of the F-22 Raptor, effective immediately." The crowd broke into a stunned ripple of applause. Maddie said nothing. She didn't smile, didn't point. She just stood there calm, centered, weightless in her own truth, while the program that once cast her out now bowed to her brilliance. Morrison tried to leave quietly, but as he turned, General Haraway blocked him. "You filed a formal protest," the general said, voice cold. "You claimed she was a danger to Air Force assets. The telemetry shows otherwise. There's a hearing at 0900. You're going to answer for everything, starting with the falsified evaluations." Morrison said nothing. He had no ground left to stand on. The next day, Colonel Morrison resigned, effective immediately, reassigned to a non-operational desk in Alaska. Madison's flight data triggered a revision of the F-22's flight manuals. Engineers and commanders alike began rethinking what was possible in the air. But more than the jet, it was her. It was what she had become. No longer the girl walked off the flight line. Now she was the one who had flown straight over every doubter's head and rewritten the sky while she was up there. 6 weeks after her legendary flight, Captain Madison Hayes sat alone in a quiet office deep inside the Pentagon, the late afternoon light slanting across her desk. Outside, military aides and civilian contractors hurried past in crisp uniforms and polished shoes. Unaware, they were walking by the woman whose maneuvers had already triggered 3 software upgrades in the Air Force's crown jewel, the F-22 Raptor. Inside, the walls were bare except for 2 things. A framed photo of a little girl sitting in an F-15 cockpit, grinning beside a man in full uniform, her father, Colonel Jacob Hayes. A plaque engraved with words not from a general, but from Madison herself. "The sky doesn't care about your gender. It only respects skill, courage, and the will to rise." For most, her flight had been the climax, the redemption. But for Madison, it was just the starting point. Because now people were watching. Cadets, pilots, commanders, even skeptics. They weren't doubting her anymore. They were listening. And some of them, especially the women, were stepping forward from the shadows of fear and silence. One message stood out. A video, sent anonymously, from a young girl sitting in the cockpit of a retired fighter at a local air museum. "I'm going to be a pilot like you. My teacher said girls can't fly fighters, but I told her about Captain Hayes. Now she wants me to write a report on you for the whole class." Madison watched it 3 times, not because she needed to, but because she needed to remember what it meant to keep going even when no one believed in you. The next change came faster than anyone expected. The Secretary of the Air Force, after reviewing misconduct evidence from Morrison's record and testimonies from over 24 female pilots, signed a new directive. It created an elite advanced flight unit under Colonel Marshall's command, focused on testing next-gen aircraft without bias, a place where performance was the only standard. Its unofficial name? Winter's Wolves. Named in honor of Madison's call sign during her academy days, whispered now with quiet reverence across the force. The unit's motto? "We don't just fly, we break ceilings." 6 months later, Madison returned to Crosswind Air Combat Academy, the same base where she had once been humiliated, stripped of her wings, and escorted off like a trespasser. Only now, she wasn't there as a trainee. She stood on the stage as the keynote speaker, addressing the incoming class of pilot candidates for the newly reformed Advanced Testing Program. Behind her sat rows of cadets, nearly 40% of them women, all of them watching her like she was something between a myth and a lighthouse. "The cockpit doesn't care about your background," she told them, voice firm, calm. "It doesn't ask if you were underestimated. It doesn't check your gender or where you came from. It asks one thing: can you fly?" She paused, looked across the audience, and spotted Cadet Jennifer Torres, a young woman who had reached out after Madison's demonstration flight and reapplied to the program, now wearing her own pilot wings. Jennifer gave a small nod, and Madison nodded back. One pilot to another, one woman to another. Not equals by default, but by choice, by effort, by truth. There were still whispers in some halls, quiet doubts muttered behind doors that refused to open fast enough. Some claimed Madison was a political token. Others suggested she'd been lucky. But results have a way of silencing noise. Under her guidance, Winter's Wolves broke 14 performance records in its first year. More impressively, their accident rate was the lowest in experimental flight testing history. Excellence had returned, and it no longer came with disclaimers. On the first anniversary of her return to the cockpit, Madison took a rare day off and drove to a quiet military cemetery outside San Antonio. The grave was modest. Just a name, a date, and a single line: Cole Jacob Hayes. He flew for those who couldn't. She stood in silence for a long time, then placed a polished flight patch at the base of the headstone, the one Morrison had ripped from her uniform all those months ago. "I did it, Dad," she whispered. "Not like you did, but in my own way. I think you'd be proud." The wind picked up, tugging at her jacket, rustling the trees. It almost sounded like a voice. "Reach for the stars, kiddo. The sky was never meant to be a limit." Later that week, back at the Pentagon, she received a knock at her door. It was Lieutenant Jennifer Torres, now officially part of her unit. "Ma'am," Jennifer said, holding out a small wooden box, "I think these belong to you." Inside were the wings Madison had loaned her months earlier, the ones her father had worn on his final mission. "I got my own now," Jennifer said, touching the wings pinned to her uniform. "But someone else needs those more than I do now." Madison raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "My little sister," Jennifer smiled. "She just applied to the academy, wants to be a test pilot, like you." Madison nodded slowly. "Then she's already ahead of where I started." That evening, Madison reviewed schematics for a next-generation hypersonic aircraft in her secure command office. The aircraft didn't have a name yet, only a project code. She would be the first to fly it. The risk was high. The expectations? Even higher. Her phone buzzed with a message from Colonel Marshall. "Sim data looks promising. You ready?" Madison smiled, typed back. "The sky's never been a limit, Colonel, just a starting point. Some stories end with applause, others with silence." Madison Hayes' story ends in both a quiet thunder that echoes across hangars and hallways, inside cockpits and classrooms, in the voices of cadets and commanders alike. She didn't demand recognition. She didn't need revenge. She simply flew so well, no one could ever again deny she belonged. And in doing so, she opened the sky for others who had once only dared to dream from the ground.